This is, of course, the Coalition Talk Radio, broadcasting live on the Go Local Live Network, golocalprov.com, on Facebook, of course, Go Local, on the coalitionradio.us, and, of course, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and Pawtucket at Pawtucket is Home, which is our newest Twitter feed set up to take multiple daily personal shots on a craven base level at our elected leaders. But what's important right now is joining me in studio for the very first time in the Coalition is, of course, Arvin Vohra. Arvin is the Vice Chairman of the Libertarian Party of America. Interestingly enough, he is a graduate of Brown University, class of 2001 in math, and, of course, is the leader and the owner of the Vohra method, which we will talk about at length as we explore libertarian philosophies and methodologies to addressing the education crisis here in the country. But first, welcome to the Coalition.
Thanks for having me on.
You're in town, of course. You're going to be one of 3 speakers tomorrow night at the Libertarian Annual Convention. And Rhode Island is a state, I think it's pretty fair to say that despite a strong undercurrent, where the understanding, if you will, that you are a libertarian is very new. I meet people here in Rhode Island all the time, and when I ask them the simplistic set of questions, do you believe in personal self-determination? Yes, I do. Do you believe in limited government? Yes, I do. Do you believe in personal freedom? Yes, I do. Guess what? You are a libertarian, and they usually respond in shock and horror because they've been told there's something else. So let's start, if you will, on Libertarian 101. Let's define your vision of a libertarian.
When I think about what a libertarian is, to me the question you have to ask is, what does a libertarian do, or what does a libertarian want to do? And the goal of most libertarians, and the goal of the Libertarian Party certainly, is to reduce the size, the scope, and the power of government at the federal, state, and local level. And so what we work to do is all kinds of activism, strategy, outreach, etc., again with that overall goal of making government smaller. And you have some people who want to make government a lot smaller, and you have some people who want to make government so much smaller that it doesn't actually even exist anymore.
If you're talking about stages of libertarian, and you bring up an important point, because there are times the libertarian movement appears balkanized. I'd like to say that I prefer to put a better spin on it. I'd like to think that we're still in our own various stages of self-exploration when it comes to where we are on the libertarian scale. But talk about some of the, if you will, some of the breakdowns of where libertarians are. I mean, you've got pragmatic libertarians, you've got minarchists, and give us kind of a snapshot of the different levels.
So you have a lot of different libertarians that will agree that we need to reduce the size of government. Different libertarians are going to say, well, there's different levels to how much they want to reduce it. So, for example, if we take the income tax, like a hardcore anarchist or anarcho-capitalist will say we need to get rid of the entire income tax. A minarchist, that means somebody who wants to have a minimum size government, might say we need to cut the income tax in half, or maybe cut it by 70%. And so that's what you're going to see inside the libertarian movement. You're going to see some people who want major changes and others who want more moderate changes, but the direction is always towards smaller. Because see, we realize that if you reduce the income tax, that means at the same time you're reducing the war on drugs. You're reducing military overreach. You're reducing wasteful educational spending. You're allowing people to find better alternatives in education. You're reducing things like the FCC, which just get in the way of artistic expression.
Where do you define yourself at this point in your life?
Now, I personally, when we look at it, we can look at it in 2 ways. I personally say, what is my goal cutting? So in that sense, sometimes I call myself a cut archist. How much do I want to cut? Personally, all of it. So I view myself as an anarcho-capitalist or a voluntarist.
If you were to describe your journey, now, I think people first would be probably still in shock that you're a graduate of Brown University. And I say that with love because my daughter just graduated from an Ivy League school. And there's a lot of urban legend cliches about the level of liberalism that's the indoctrination that takes place. But did you arrive at Brown, or at what point in your life journey did you discover the libertarian movement?
I became a libertarian, or I considered myself a libertarian, when I was in high school. I didn't fully understand what it meant, but I knew that I wanted less government. I knew that I wanted there to be less social involvement, and I knew that I wanted there to be less economic involvement. And so I discovered the Libertarian Party as the organization that was actually trying to reduce the size and scope of government. It wasn't until much later, though, that I actually got involved. I didn't actually get involved in the Libertarian Party very actively until about 2010. And for me, a big part of that was because I'd been tricked by the Obama campaign. See, I thought that here's somebody who's honest. Here's somebody who's going to actually, get us out of the war on drugs. Here's somebody who's actually going to make policies that make sense. Here's a guy that I felt that I can trust. When I realized that it was all just a show, that he was just pretending to be about creating freedom, going against the establishment, then I realized I really needed to get involved. I realized there was no easy way to do it. We weren't going to be able to do this in some easy way by just voting for an honest seeming Democrat, that we were going to have to do this ourselves. So I got involved very actively in the Libertarian Party in about 2009, 2010.
There seems to be this romantic notion in America that government's involvement in any aspect of our life will introduce a level of fairness, a level of equity, a level of justice, if you will. Is any of that true?
I don't think so. I've certainly, not that I've ever seen. What I've actually seen is the reverse. You see, if you have a monopoly without government, what happens is you get competition, and very quickly you don't have a monopoly anymore. But when you are able to influence government, which can use things like force, use police, military, all that kind of stuff, then the government can allow you to have those special favors. As an example, look at defense contractors. Right now, defense contractors sort of lobby Congress for these huge, huge contracts. And Congress gives that money to them because, again, they're getting money from the defense contractors. Congress is more inclined to favor a very militarist policy. And that benefits defense contractors at the expense of every other business that exists, at the expense of all of their families. People who are working hard can't just spend the money or the effort that they put forth. They can't spend the fruits of their labor on food and clothing and education and things that make sense. Instead, a big portion of your work is taken out and used on this insane, unnecessary defense contracts, this extremely expensive military policy that the defense contractors lobby for.
The natural knee-jerk reaction of any neocon, any quote-unquote, I'll just be blunt, a Republican conservative, will be, well, you then don't support the security of our nation. That you're un-American, or that I'll use the word that they throw at me all the time, that you're somehow naive. How would you respond to that?
Well, we can look at the actual lessons of actual history. If you look at the people who have attacked us in the past, many have actually been trained or armed by that policy of getting involved everywhere on everything all the time. The current destabilization in the Middle East that has led to the rise of ISIS was, according to many experts, directly caused by the U.S. involvement in foreign affairs. The expense is astronomical. The moral costs are immeasurable. The actual level of safety is going down because we are creating enemies with this type of military overreach. There are people around the world that hate Americans, not because they've ever met, because the only Americans that they've met are the ones that are setting up bases in their countries, that are invading their countries, that are creating puppet governments in their countries. And what we're actually doing is we're essentially acting almost like a recruiting service for ISIS. All they have to do is point to American bombings, American troops, saying, didn't the Americans bomb your wedding? Didn't the Americans bomb a hospital where your family member was trying to recover? Didn't the Americans bomb your school? And they can see that it has happened. So actually, the result of the military policy has been to create more enemies, to spend a lot more money, to spend more blood and treasure on all these policies that have no endpoint, no real goal. And the biggest problem with that is that something that actually, folks like defense contractors are actually benefiting from. The longer these wars continue, the more money they're going to make by selling weapons.
And yet, at the same time, it would seem counterintuitive, because security, an overwhelming security, if it's inwardly directed in terms of just maintaining basic security in the United States, can be very effective and is justifiable. We have the right to defend ourselves. Yet our foreign policy across the Middle East. This past year, I like to point out, was the 100th anniversary of something called the Sykes-Picot Accord, which in 1916, at the time, it did not involve the Americans, but involved Western European powers, that divvied up what we now know as Syria and a number of other nations and created artificial boundaries, the likes of which have never been recovered from. And we played into that in our post-World War II involvement.
Yep.
Why is a certain segment of the American political culture in such denial over that?
Because that view, understanding reality as it actually was or as it actually is, costs a lot of people a lot of money. If the U.S. military budget went down from $1 trillion to, say, $1 billion, still more than enough for a nuclear power to be able to defend itself from the armed invasion of a foreign army, because that's what a military is for. It's not designed to hunt down one guy. It's designed to fight armies. Let's say that went down. Think about what that means. It means that you have all these defense contractors who are making $999 billion less than they were before. It's going to hurt people in their wallets. It's going to hurt people in the amount of money that they get. So they're going to do whatever they can to try to convince us that it is absolutely necessary to our survival to be militarily everywhere all the time.
And at the same time, when you have rash incidences of pure capitalism breaking out, it would appear that capitalism in its pure form, not the bastardized version that we practice here in the United States, or particularly here in Rhode Island, that a level of understanding is accomplished between people of different cultures, different backgrounds, because I believe a man's basic desire to be rewarded for their efforts.
There is one of the things that we often talk about is that imagine what would happen if we got rid of all these trade sanctions and we started treating other countries through trade. We started dealing with them through trade rather than through this kind of trade isolationism. If you think about what happens over there, that means companies in Iran have to learn to sell things to Americans. And imagine that company for a second. Let's say that at first they decide to sell to Americans based on the propaganda they're getting from their own governments, saying, hey, evil people, do you want to buy this computer? I mean, obviously it's not going to go very far. So then what do they have to do? They have to learn about American culture. They have to understand our ideas of liberalism. They have to understand our ideas of women's rights and minority rights, of gay rights. They have to understand the way that we actually think. And the thing is, once you understand an idea, you start to evaluate it. You start to compare it to your own idea. And you start to say, whoa, maybe these ideas of liberalism, of free market enterprise, of respect for humans and respect for the dignity of the individual, maybe those are good ideas. And so we actually end up spreading those ideas effectively rather than just creating a bunch of enemies overseas.
And we've got living proof of that. I mean, within my parents' generation, a little older than you, within my parents' generation, my father is a veteran of World War II. There are two of our two primary opponents in World War II because of expansion of trade and the free exchange of people, ideas, commerce are now our two longest term allies.
Yep.
And of course, we're talking about Germany and France. I mean, it's my father is 94. Actually, tomorrow he's celebrating his 94th birthday. Happy birthday, Dad! I know you're going to hear this tomorrow. Those are people we were in a desperate war with. And simple commerce bridged that gap.
Yep.
And there's been ebbs and flows, but there's been no outbreak or even really comprehension or even any thought of violence between these cultures in the space really of a generation.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I mean, nobody was considered more evil than Germany, but during World War II, with the possible exception of Japan. And now they're both people that we trade with, we exchange ideas with. We have all these ideas going back and forth. They're learning from us, we're learning from them. And that's how it's supposed to be. Listen, I mean, imagine if instead of, you going to work and then, working hard, getting money, using that money to buy something, imagine if instead of that you just went around bombing all the shops in your area. It wouldn't help you. It would just make them hate you more. You wouldn't be even getting the stuff because you destroyed the stuff in the shops. It is not a good policy to base our entire interaction with the world on military destruction. It is much more effective to base it on trade and commerce and a free market and an international free market.
And on a certain level, and obviously World War II is certainly more dramatic on a global level than what we're involved in right now, but has there ever been a time in recent American history where we've been picking fights with more groups of people than we are right now. We seem to be trying to get in a you-know-what match with just about everybody.
And it seems that way. And I think the reason is this. With the end of the Cold War, the United States no longer had any meaningful opposition to justify all this military spending. When Russia was there, when the Soviet Union was there, we could say, well, we need to have all this military spending to deal with Russia. I don't think that's true because we broke them economically, not militarily. So I don't think that's as true as people think. But now there's no Russia. I mean, there's no Soviet Union. Of course, Russia, of course, still exists. But in order to find some way to justify this level of spending that defense contractors have become addicted to, we need to start picking, instead of one big fight, many small fights with everybody that we possibly can.
Right.
And so that's what I think is driving this. This is purely, in my opinion, about nothing more than finding some facile excuse for defense contractors to be able to take money from American taxpayers.
Remember the word peace dividend?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened to the peace dividend? It's just, it evaporated. Each of the established political parties, they're both guilty of this. When they've been in office, they seem to be hell-bent to find a demon. Mm-hmm. It would appear that their approach to uniting this country is only to find someone to be in opposition to. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you see any potential change from that with this administration? Or are they
with this administration? God, no. God, absolutely not. I mean, that seems to be... I mean, this administration has basically found every politically non-powerful group and tried to find ways to... And again, these are not groups that have he hasn't gone after any big or powerful or politically significant groups. He's gone after undocumented workers who can't really vote. He's gone after disabled people. I mean, he's gone after basically everybody. So I don't see that strategy changing with this administration anytime soon.
This conversation, of course, naturally leads us into a discussion of our borders. Mm-hmm. Folks, go to the Libertarian Party platform, and I'll be certainly providing links forever to it. But we talk about, and these words are the devil in the age of Trump, mm-hmm. open borders. Mm-hmm. What do we mean by open borders, and why do we as libertarians justify that? Is that out of some weakness or some personal revulsion about our status as American citizens? Is that any of that? Where does it stem from?
So what does it mean to have open borders? I mean, to many libertarians, most libertarians, I would say, certainly to me, there's two parts of open borders. First part is you have open borders. But the second part of it is you also don't have welfare programs. You don't have government-run welfare programs. Of course, because family budgets aren't being drained through welfare, now you have more money for private charities, and we've seen many countries where the state can't provide welfare, so private charities actually step in and do a much better job of uplifting people in a way that allows them to maintain and actually increase their self-respect and dignity. So there's two parts. So the one, the borders are open, you can leave, you can go, whatever. And two, there's no welfare. And for us, open borders is actually a bi-directional thing. We focus a lot on who can come into the country. But realistically right now, if you have a decent amount of money, maybe a few $1,000s, you can probably find a way to come into the country legally. It's often ignored how much the U.S. government tries to keep people from going out of the country. They're actually, I believe last year, they massively increased the fees for those who decided they didn't want their U.S. citizenship anymore, didn't want to pay taxes to America because American taxes are very, very high. They've actually tried to increase that to make it harder to leave. Libertarians say, listen, if you want to come and not steal any money from anybody else, then come. If you want to leave, you're not required to keep on paying into this expensive and broken system. So it's a two-directional thing. Our last presidential candidate, Gary Johnson, really had a nice way to wrap it up. He says, listen, we have two parts. You have a disease check, a security check, and then that's it. Other libertarians say you don't even need that. There are libertarians that identify as libertarian but just simply disagree with that part of the Libertarian Party platform.
We believe in a free and open exchange of ideas, commerce, and people. Mm-hmm. It's almost a canard at this point that immigration is, generates innovation. Your grandparents, my grandparents, whatever. But it's a thoroughly legitimate idea. Mm-hmm. When you look at the timing of the the Trump embargo on refugees and his decision to clamp down on immigration. Actually, on a physical level, it came at a very precarious time of the year. Now, academics of all national backgrounds traditionally leave at Christmas from the universities, go home to their native countries, and then come back.
Yep.
We managed in one fell swoop to take two groups of people, political refugees who crave liberty to a degree that most Americans can't even begin to comprehend.
Correct.
And at the same time, we took some of the most innovative minds in the world and said to both of them, yeah, we don't need you. What does that say to the world at large when you have this arbitrary smackdown, if you will, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a very backwards policy followed in Brazil and Argentina, whose economies right now, or for the last several years, have been in a total meltdown. And they made an interesting decision, which is they were going to tax computers at a very high level. Computers in Brazil and Argentina cost more dollars than computers do over here. And given that their currency is weaker, it's a huge expense to buy a new computer. The result of that has been that every industry that relies on computers, which is pretty much every industry, in Brazil and Argentina is hamstrung. They can't compete globally because they just don't have the tools to do it. They have kept out the most valuable tool they possibly can have, or as I would actually say the second most valuable tool, because a computer isn't going to do anything unless you have highly skilled workers, highly skilled labor to make it do something useful. In America, what we're trying to do right now, it's not just keeping out refugees, it's also keeping out of all unbelievably stupid ideas, keeping out H-1 immigrants, that's highly skilled labor. That's telling American companies that if you want the best and the brightest coming here, making your companies more globally competitive so that they stay in business, so they don't go out of business and fire everybody, so they stay in business, so they can hire more people, so the people working there can support local businesses. If you as an American company want to do that, that's too bad. You're not allowed to you can't have the best and the brightest. That kind of just completely backwards policy is stealing money from all of us. Even if your company doesn't hire people from overseas or doesn't need very skilled computer or finance or math labor or whatever, if you run a restaurant, people they're going to have to eat somewhere. The result has been that right now, instead of bringing people over here, American companies are doing, guess what? Sending jobs over there. They've sent out almost the entire manufacturing sector. They're sending out the computer sector. They're going to be they're sending out financial research. And the result is all those people who are making those American salaries, they're not spending money at your business or at your restaurant or at your store. They're spending money, obviously, in their home countries. Not because they don't want to come here and spend money at your business, because, again, the current administration and the previous administration have decided to go with a policy of keeping the best and brightest out.
Why do you think, and this has occurred particularly under the emerging Trump base into the Trump administration, why has the word globalism become such a dirty word in America?
I think that because a lot of people in a lot of the groups are making globalism the opposite of nationalism. And when they say nationalism, they don't just mean like a nation as a country. They mean a nation as a group of people with a shared culture and heritage. And usually that means kind of like a white-centered type nationalism. And so when they see globalism, they view that as the opposite of that. Now, I personally think that's not a terribly intelligent way to live life, but if somebody wants to be a white supremacist, that's your right to do if that's what you think is best. The problem is that while fighting cultural globalism, they're also fighting economic globalism. That's just a bad idea. At that point, see, what you're now doing is you're just hurting everybody. You're preventing businesses from running effectively. Imagine if you told people that they can't buy light bulbs that are made outside of the United States. That means that all businesses now have higher costs. That doesn't help anybody. So what I say is, if you want to, if you believe that to exist in cultural isolation, that's your right. I mean, I think you'd probably gain more by not doing that. But if that's what you want to do, that's your right. But I would strongly advise even those who are in favor of cultural nationalism to strongly oppose economic nationalism, because that actually is just economically hurting everybody.
Well, now this brings up a critical point because, again, the knee-jerk reaction is that somehow protectionism is going to, and by de facto, trade tariffs are going to somehow protect American jobs. That's the furthest thing from the case.
That's actually not true. And I understand why people think that. They think that if the only people that can be hired are Americans, is going to make there be more jobs. I get where they're coming from, but they haven't really thought it through. First, they haven't realized that you can always send jobs overseas, which already happened to the entire manufacturing sector, turning cities like Detroit into a total wasteland. Which could happen. Imagine if that could happen in Wall Street too. Would that be great for New York if the entire financial sector was shipped overseas? Remember, the hardest thing to ship overseas is manufacturing. You know why? Because shipping a car back to America is a big, annoying headache. If you move the white collar type jobs overseas, that's not hard because their product is an email. Their product can be shipped digitally. Their product is usually something that can be very easily transferred. It's the easiest thing to ship overseas. So when people think that these trade tariffs are going to protect American jobs, it's not going to do that. It's going to send jobs overseas. It's going to hamstring U.S. companies, preventing them from growing and becoming globally competitive. If you want to see what it actually looks like when you shut down that type of stuff, you can look at Argentina right now. That's basically what they did. They were like, we need to be a fully self-sufficient country. And they kind of are, but their technology is stuck from like the 1920s. And they're now an economic laughingstock because they rejected all of the ideas of trade specialization, all the benefits that we get from trade.
Folks, if you're just joining us, you are listening on the Go Local Live Network. Arvin Vohra is the Vice Chairman of the Libertarian Party of America. He's in town visiting with us at the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. And for tomorrow night's eagerly anticipated annual convention and dinner meeting. The dinner meeting is being held at Bristol, American Legion. You can find out more about it. I think for another hour or two, there's about 3 tickets left, lpri.us. 3 libertarians, I call them 3 of the libertarian rock stars in America. Arvin's going to be speaking, Larry Sharp, who is our vice presidential candidate, and of course, you're probably all familiar with Matt Welch, who, by the way, this week is appearing, if you have HBO, on the Bill Maher Politically Incorrect segment. Brings us to a crucial point. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a local example that Rhode Islanders can appreciate. Recently, the state of Rhode Island had, within the last few years, had granted a monopoly to one corporation to have all the casino gambling in the state. Mm-hmm. The next step, of course, was in giving that exclusive, they were not permitted to build hotels because at hotels, the original premise would be is that they would be in competition with area hotels. As a libertarian, I'm kind of like revolted by both sides of that argument because they shouldn't have had a monopoly in the first place, and then to not permit them to have a hotel is actually can be devastating to the success or potential success of the monopoly.
Right.
All right. But then the argument came up, and I found this just stunning. Rhode Islanders were verklempt, if you will, upset that the hotel that they finally allowed them to build, that they could support with their monopoly and essentially use a monopoly to subsidize the construction of a hotel and operate at artificially high profits in competition with Rhode Islanders who had used their own risk capital and sweat equity to build a hotel, were using, God forbid, out-of-state labor. Now, let's think of this sort of economic ping pong that we're playing. All right. On one hand, you grant a monopoly. Bad. The next thing you do, though, is cripple the monopoly by saying you can't compete in certain sectors. Okay, that's nuts. Then the third part is you finally grant them that monopoly, but you help subsidize the construction of a hotel that's competitive against a Rhode Island hotel. Now all of a sudden, okay, you see where this is going. Please, maybe you can do a better job than I do, because there's days where, hey, Tony, how often do I feel like I'm screaming in a closet? All right? Please, if you can, because what I've always enjoyed about your speeches, your writing, is that you take these issues and make them accessible. Mm-hmm. Why is that just a complete mess? I mean, on just every single level.
Let's compare it to the alternative. All right, let's compare it to the alternative that says there's no restrictions on gambling at all. That means there's no reason that anybody, including you, set up a slot machine, a poker game, whatever you want to do. You can make it better. You can find ways to make the experience that your clients have better. Maybe you have that one friend who's, he's not really successful yet, but all he really likes is, playing cards and stuff like that. He might be an ideal person to do something like this. So what do you have? Instead of having a single monolithic thing, you have many people creating different forms of gambling. What might we have? Maybe new games created, maybe new experiences created. You might have gambling that's maybe a little bit more online, that doesn't have a lot of the alcohol associations that are usually associated with gambling. Or maybe it's offline, has even more. I mean, whatever works. Let's say they want to build, they hire whoever's around. It doesn't have to be somebody that's part of some special privileged group. They hire whoever can do the job the best. And that means their building is the best. That means their costs are not inflated. You go to that place, you pay a lower cost. You get a better experience for a lower cost. What does that do to Providence as a city? Now it's an attractive place to go. It's a more fun and exciting place to go. That means there's huge booms for local businesses. More jobs are being created in Providence. More opportunities are being created in Providence. Some of the areas outside of the city that right now don't have as many economic opportunities as we'd like, now all of a sudden there's all kinds of economic opportunities. And through the power of the free market, what do we see? We see all these opportunities for those who want them to do something more. And those aren't limited just to jobs within the gambling industry, but those are also can spread to jobs in when people come to gambling, maybe they want to go to there's more hotels, maybe they want to go to more restaurants, maybe they want to explore culture, maybe they want to maybe they win a bunch of money, they want to go to an art gallery. Think about how it helps the arts, and all of that helps grow all parts of the economy. And all we had to do to make that happen was pull the government out, pull out the thing that's creating the restrictions, and watch the free market watch the free market do what it does best.
I often preach that capitalism in its purest form is really the mechanism by which individuals can reach their full human potential. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that, and we first have to agree on one concept, that people are success driven. Mm-hmm. They're driven and they're attracted by creature comforts. They're driven by success in of itself, but ultimately they are looking for physical rewards for their efforts. Mm-hmm. I think we have to all agree on that at some point. So when you create that type of dynamic environment where people are ultimately successful because of their own personal equity, their investment, their skills, their innovation, the profits from that then are available and investable in a variety of forms, whether it be an outright investment in a business or just by casual spending. Mm-hmm. And that's, in economic terms, earlier in the show I talked about the multiplier effect. That's how the multiplier effect is supposed to work.
Yep.
When individual choices, whether it be, say, for example, in the media. The media is cutthroat right now. If you're good, you can be successful. Mm-hmm. If you stink, you will die. Mm-hmm. That's that same type of Lord of the Flies, eat your own, young, dynamic innovation, innovate or die, has to exist at every level. And when it doesn't, we suffer as a community. Mm-hmm. We're less for it. Mm-hmm. And that romantic notion, I hope what we've just done is throw completely on its head that somehow government's involvement is going to provide a fairer, lifestyle for folks. Again, it isn't working at any level. Arvin, we've got a situation here in the state where there's only one real legal provider of mass transportation, and that, of course, is the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, mm-hmm. who is in a economic tailspin. The state is so broke that they had this one program for a few $100,000 a year, and I'm as libertarian as they get, but which provided free bus fares. But they've had to take that away. We're in a situation here in Rhode Island where you have people going hungry who can't even avail themselves of basic transportation to get to available foods from private charity. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the state mechanism, and this is straight out of Atlas Shrugged, the state mechanism to disseminate money to these individuals has actually completely collapsed because of the inability of the state to run a computer system. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to get much worse here in America?
I think it's really important to realize that there's not only this one model. I've traveled a lot, many different countries. One of the really interesting things that I've seen in parts of Southeast Asia is the idea of competing charities. Mm-hmm. You'll have charities that are just next door to each other, competing for either local dollars or tourist dollars, depending on what they're trying to do. And I mean, a lot of them are quite good. And the best thing about Charity 1 is that Charity 2 is right on their heels, making sure that they're being as effective as possible. Because if Charity 1 isn't really being that effective, all the support's going to go to Charity 2, or to Charity 3, or Charity 4. The idea that only the government has the ability to do something as simple as provide bus fares just doesn't make any sense. It's not if you look at the level of complexity that a lot of these charities work with, I mean, some of these are going into villages, where women don't really have a lot of the same rights and respect that we expect today. And giving them, providing education, bringing them up, helping them eventually run parts of the charity, that's complex. Handing somebody a bus fare is just not on the same order of magnitude at all. That is something that private charity could do. That's something that private charity would do. Why doesn't private charity do it right now? Because they think the government's doing it. I mean, that kind of false information out there. I mean, if you went around in Rhode Island trying to raise money for something that people think the government is already doing, you'd have a hard time because people think the government's already doing it.
Well, because you have this confiscatory tax structure where it has backed the American family into a forced dual income mode, where folks are literally physically exhausted because they're paying confiscatory taxes, they're paying for private education despite the fact that they're subsidizing a failed public school model. And at a certain point, what's evolved is a complete collapse of the sense of community. And the notion is, why should I do that? I'm stroking a check every week to the government to take care of this stuff for me. You have this breakdown. The connection has been lost in many places, not everywhere, but in many places between the immediacy of a problem and your recognition that you bear some responsibility in fixing it yourself, not government. That is not the blue pill or the red pill.
And that's the key thing. I mean, what government does best is it creates the illusion that we don't have individual responsibility, that it's going to do all that kind of stuff for us. And that's what's happening in charity. Many of us don't feel that we have individual responsibility because we have been hammered by this propaganda machine that teaches us that we don't have individual responsibility, that our only responsibility is to pay taxes to this government that's going to handle it. And everything else, that's not our problem. It's not our business to figure out, who should we be helping. That's not our job. And that is a very corrosive effect of government. And it's one that can be best removed simply by removing government from all of those areas as much as possible where they are making decisions for you. Instead, just create situations where people do what they do best, which is make decisions for themselves and their loved ones.
Why is the American educational system failing at the primary and secondary level?
Because you have a government that is much more concerned with giving special favors to the lobbyists that fund it than it is with creating an effective education. You have these billion-dollar nonsense things like Common Core that would never have a prayer of surviving in the free market, being bought up wholesale and used at all kinds of schools because federal mandates have said so, or required it, or encouraged it, or because state-level mandates say so, or because the textbook companies just get to the local level and they bribe they donate to the campaigns of the people who are running for a local school board. The way to fix something like this is to end all government involvement in education of any kind whatsoever. And what you're going to see if you do that is you're going to have people who will discover what so many homeschool families already discovered, or unschooling families, folks like Elon Musk, who've discovered that this type of education, the government-run education, is not very good. So let's find a different way to do education. Let's find an education that works for my kids or works for me. Let's find a type of education of all these various free or low cost, or for that matter, high cost forms of education. Let's find something that gets the job actually done. It's not just going through the government's motions, but actually finding a way to have kids connect with these ideas, to learn the skills, to develop initiative. It's the most important skill of all, more important than math or reading anything else, is the initiative to pursue things. I forget who it is, but a very famous commentator said that education is the process of learning how to learn. And what do we see? People who've had their initiative crushed by the government school system. Once they're out of school, all academic learning essentially stops. That's not what we need. Real education builds up initiative. It doesn't replace initiative. And so, to me, the solution to something like this is to completely remove all government involvement of any kind, to do it right away, and allow people to discover all the great things that are already out there right now.
It's sad because on one level, one of our last great exports, if you will, is the American educational system at the university level. We are, despite the best efforts of the Trump regime, we continue to see. This past week, on a personal note, my oldest daughter graduated at an Ivy League university. What was remarkable was how international said Ivy League university is. Just truly international. Children at the teenage level are no longer competing with children from Pennsylvania or California. They're competing for those spots with literally children from around the world.
Yep.
And I mean, are they equipped at this point? By and large, is the public education system, in totality, are they doing a good enough job? I would argue not. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
No. I don't think that the public school system is, or the government-regulated school system is. The question is, are they doing a good enough job? And that's a kind of relative question. My question is, are they doing as good a job as a free market? A black and white TV is an impressive invention, is an impressive creation. I mean, it would take, even me being with the lessons of history, it would take a while to be able to construct one. But it's not good enough. When our standard is iPads and plasma screens and all this, or LED screens, it's not good enough. So the fact that the public school system is able to accomplish something, okay, fine, that's fine. But it's not able to accomplish nearly as much as free market education can. And I actually bring the same concern to the college level. I don't believe that the college level right now is accomplishing as much in terms of client-centered education as it would if all the subsidies that are currently here were removed. And the first thing that would change, in my opinion, if you got the government out of college, the first thing that would change is I believe the prices would drop.
Right.
And I think that everybody can agree, every person on earth can agree, that they would rather pay less tuition, they would prefer to pay less tuition than more tuition. Even if you don't want to see any changes in the structure or classroom or anything, I'm pretty sure we'd all agree that less tuition is better. That's price innovation, finding a way to charge less. It's a major part of the entire unsubsidized, unregulated free market, and something that we could see right away at the higher education level.
Right now, if the average American is forced to either accept a marginalized, mediocre public education, with some exceptions, or choose between that and the financial slavery that accompanies sending your child if they somehow manage to escape from said secondary education level equipped to perform at a high level, if they manage to do that despite sometimes the best efforts of government, the financial slavery that comes with literally a potentially, I think going into the next year or two, $500,000 commitment to, when all costs are considered, to a private educational institution, which may or may not still equip them with the tools they need, based on, incredibly enough, budget limitations from a hyperventilated secondary educational system. It's incredibly destructive.
There's a cost aspect and there's also a regulation aspect, which is very important to consider. Mm-hmm. For example, in my home state, Maryland, a private school, I'm not talking about a public school, a private school by law could not hire Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs when he was alive, to teach a computer science class. Why? They don't have a bachelor's degree. Nor could they hire any of the amazing tech entrepreneurs throughout Silicon Valley to teach computer science classes. Again, no. And that's their restriction on private schools. It's far from their bizarrest restriction. I mean, they have many other ones. But when you're dealing with governments that are just at the micro level, interfering with educational innovation, we are all being robbed of what the benefits of that innovation could be. Right now we have kind of black and white TV level education. What if we had iPad level education? What if we had 3D TV level education? What if we had education that made the process easier and simpler, where you were able to learn faster and more deeply? What if those things were the things that were guiding the shape of education? I mean, that's the type of education that we want. There's no reason why our entertainment tools should be advancing so quickly and our educational tools should be left in the 18th century. What we need to do is to allow that innovation, that human genius that's made so many other things. in American culture so great to do the same thing to education?
I think back again on a personal example, my elder daughter's ability to take 4 years of Arabic at a private school, which grew simply out of the multi-talented teachers who were, in several cases, from the Middle East, who were already there teaching French. A decision was made, let's structure this properly, let's do all the homework to make sure it delivers a great education to our kids, but let's start an Arabic program. And within a year or so, you had an Arabic program. Fundamentally changed my daughter's life. She was able to actually compete at the Ivy League level and actually was able to accelerate to a sophomore level in Arabic because she'd had 4 years of it in high school. All done simply, all done cost effectively because the artificial restraints were not placed as roadblocks to the success of the student, which is ultimately the product that we're supposed to be working towards. It would appear to me that in many cases that our educational systems are merely excuses. The students, that is, are merely excuses for you to have a complex bureaucracy, which is very lucrative to both vendors and the people who run the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, we've got some kids over here we got to deal with. What a pain. That's everywhere.
That's very, very true. I mean, in many parts of education, in the secondary education, to a large extent, even in higher education, students, and when I say students, I mean folks like high school students, middle school students, the college students, are often treated by the institution essentially as cash cows. Grad students are a little bit different because they're more involved in research, which is the primary driving force of a university. But they're treated like cash cows. Now you might say, well, who would put up with that? Why would anybody put up with being treated like that? And it's because the government creates a system that allows it. The first thing they do is they create a system where somebody who's 17, 18 can take out a gigantic loan that they're often going to be paying back until their 50s to pursue education in any subject, no matter what. And the result is that now, at the expense of the student, the university is able to pursue whatever it wants, and the student is left with this crushing load of debt that lasts often for decades. Now, if you got rid of all of the subsidies, that would reverse itself right away. Why? Because right now, colleges aren't competing on price because anybody can get a loan for any amount. But if that was no longer the case, if kids were judged for loans the same way that businesses are, they would have to, the amount of loans available would go down by a lot. That would mean that colleges would have two choices. Either they lower their prices or they go out of business. My guess is plenty of colleges would choose both, or one or the other, but the net result would be a massive decrease in college tuition, a massive decrease in college debt throughout the country for everybody.
What do you recommend in terms of at the secondary level? I mean, and this actually will lead and into our next conversation, which I always call, how do we get there from here? But both at the primary and secondary level, there really is no competition for your educational dollar. Parents are burdened by geography, and in many cases that burden is because of the economic issues of their parents. So you've got folks who by birthright are facing a lifetime of limits on their potential because of their inability to access a high level of education. Someone locally used the term the diminished expectations, or I should say the racism of diminished expectations. That's everywhere in American inner cities.
Yeah.
What do you suggest as a mechanism to lift children out of poverty by the most obvious way, and that is, of course, a high-quality education?
The question is, how do you get a high-quality education? Most of us have, at some point in our lives, eaten some food that was unhealthy. It wasn't good. It didn't do anything good for you. But you sat down to a meal and you ate it, and it wasn't very good, and afterwards maybe it didn't feel so good. What happens if right after that meal, someone said, "Hey, here's a healthy meal. Would you like to have this also?" You just say, "God, no. I'm already full of food." See, the same thing will often happen with education. There's free education available online. You can access it through all kinds of different ways. And the total cost for something like this at this point basically costs an iPad. You can get a used iPad for $70, $80. You can get free education that's often very high quality. It's put together by great teachers like Sal Khan or great universities like MIT. You have all these places like Coursera where the best professors of different universities compete with each other to provide the best free class. There's competition at free. The price is still free. Now the question is, why don't people use more of it? Well, homeschoolers use it all the time, which is one reason that homeschoolers right now are just dominating government schools when people in government schools when it comes to things like the SAT or whatever. But people who are in government schools, who are having all their energy and time and everything spent on this counterproductive curriculum, they don't then have the energy to do a whole additional school on top of that. In order to give people a situation, to create a situation where people have the impetus to pursue that, the first thing you need to do is that, and just like if you want to eat healthy, you've got to first stop eating junk food. You want to have good school, you got to first stop doing the bad school. You got to first stop forcing everybody to attend the bad school. You got to first stop locking up parents when they don't force their kids to attend the bad school. You got to stop sending around police officers to round up kids and force them into the bad school. When kids are not going to a bad school, they know they're not going. Their parents know they're not going. So what are their parents going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to say, how am I going to get myself an education? And once they've asked that question, then everything else is the question of choosing what of the many free resources is the best one for you. They're not all good for me, they're not all good for you. Each of us can choose from the different things that are, again, either low cost or entirely free that works best for you. So if you want to have better secondary education in the areas that are not getting it, first you got to get the government out of it. So people access the free things. Then you also have to recognize that people also sometimes want paid services. Sometimes they want things where their staff or somebody like guiding this, especially with younger kids. You often want to have somebody physically there, a teacher or somebody just physically there. And then you have competition. See, all these people now are looking for something. There's a thing that they want, and that means there's room for businesses to come in and operate and provide those services. But that can only happen if we get the bad thing out. To get good education in, we first have to get junk education out.
What do you say to people that say, well, there are those amongst us who aren't capable of making their own choices, that they aren't capable of understanding the difference between good and bad, that there seems to be this subtle bigotry that whether it be retirement, that whether it be training, education, that there's an entire group in the population that simply can't be trusted to make their own decisions. What would you say to them?
I would say that group is very large. I would say that group comprises essentially the entire human race. I have yet to meet a person in my life, and I know I'm not one, that has never, ever, ever made the wrong decision on something. Mm-hmm. I've bought food that I didn't like. I've bought clothes that I didn't like. I've read books that I thought were going to be good, but they turned out to be not that good. So I made those mistakes. But here's the thing. Once I made the mistake, I was able to correct it. That's how we learn as humans. Sometimes we do something, we make mistakes. That's part of learning. The idea that learning should be entirely free of mistakes doesn't make sense. So yes, there are some people, in my opinion, it's all people, who are going to make some bad decisions. But the good thing is we're going to learn from it. Judgment doesn't come from never making mistakes. Judgment usually comes from making a lot of mistakes. And by making those mistakes, by saying, wow, I thought, this Coursera course was going to be really good, but I hated it. It was totally boring, but it made me see this other Coursera course, or this, this MIT OpenCourseWare course, or this other, edX course, or this Khan Academy course. That's part of learning. Learning isn't supposed to be this totally sterile, everybody does this and it's going to be the right way always. That's that common core mentality that assumes that there is some one universal right way for everyone, which I think is nonsense. Instead, it's got to be a process of discovering what works for you. And if you never let people to start that process for fear that they will make a mistake, and they will, I guarantee you, then you're not going to get education. You're going to get sort of people going through the motions of learning some academic stuff, but never developing the initiative and the resolve to actually become educated.
Folks, if you're just joining us, you are listening to The Coalition on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, broadcasting live here on GoLocalProb.com. Of course, you can find us at coalitionradio.us, facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, and please follow us on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_Radio. Joining me in studio here at 90 Way Boston Street. People are out and about, headed to Waterfire. It's starting to get dark out. There's a palpable sense that the city is alive tonight. Joining me in studio, Arvin Vohra. He is the vice chairman of the Libertarian Party, America's third largest political party. And if you, as I like to say to our folks and friends at Halitosis Hall and at the State House, if you haven't heard of us, you will, because in this last presidential election here in Rhode Island, even in blue state Rhode Island, we tripled our vote. Nearly 15,000 Rhode Islanders voted for our presidential candidate, Gary Johnson. We will continue to be an emerging force. Our voice will be held. We are, in a sense, that mouse that roared. And tomorrow evening in Bristol is the annual Libertarian Party convention for the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. During the day, meetings from 1 till 4 o'clock will be, it's open to the public. We will be, by the way, as all our meetings are, we will be incorporating a new set of bylaws, and we'll be working on strengthening the party apparatus so that we can be more effective in delivering messages like you're hearing tonight to the people of a state who desperately need a new direction. As we found out this week on multiple occasions that job creation is failing, our budget deficits have never been higher, and yet we have a failed state government that seeks to use your taxpayer dollars to support their cronies and their friends. So let's talk civil liberties. You know, a hallmark of the Libertarian Party has been our embrace of the rights of the individual, as I always like to point out, as we fight the state. So what differentiates libertarians from what I call conservative, cafeteria conservatives, particularly in the Republican Party, sorry friends, or even progressive Democrats, all of whom, some of my best friends are in those organizations, all of whom pay homage, if you will, to civil liberties. Why are we different?
We believe that you should be able to do whatever you want with your body and the fruits of your labor, as long as you don't hurt anybody else. And so we put no restrictions on that. If you want to use any kind of drug, as long as you don't hurt somebody else, that's your right. If you want to marry somebody who's of the same gender, different gender, 10 people of 10 different genders, all of that is your right as long as you don't hurt anybody else. We don't really care if it's going to look really different from what people are used to. That's the point of being a human. That's the point of having the ability to create. We want people to create things that are different. Or if they prefer to do things that are very traditional, we respect their rights to do that. We don't believe that any one way of living has the right to tell other people that they are not allowed to do their way of living. And so in that way, we are a very unique political party. I don't think there's another political party anywhere in America that, certainly not of the same size, but I don't think it exists at all, that believes in complete protection of civil liberties the way the Libertarian Party does.
I mean, ultimately, it would appear that the level of hyper-analysis of people's behavior seems to be the obsession of the two, I'll call it the two big parties, where they focus exhaustively on every minute aspect of that behavior, whereas where we're fundamentally different is we're not endorsing or prohibiting any type of behavior. We're saying to you, you as a free person, man or woman, have the right to make that choice. And so when people come after us, as they will, because quite frankly, to a lot of the established political organizations, the notion that we would agree that you're a free person is very threatening. It allows a level of independence and an ability to sway from party control that can be maddening to a lot of people. Hell, it's maddening to us some days. No doubt about that. But as a result, our opposition to the war on drugs, our support of marriage equality, is based on your fundamental freedom to make your own decisions. Now, we have something called the non-aggression principle, and maybe you could explain that to the folks.
The non-aggression principle is a very simple idea, which means that it says that we don't initiate any force or any fraud against anybody else, particularly for the purpose of social or political gains. In other words, we don't believe that just because a different country has a different religion, or because a different individual has a different sexual practice, We don't believe in using force to change their minds. That doesn't mean we say that we can't work to change somebody's mind. If somebody disagrees with a religion, we say, by all means, go talk to them. Change their minds. But change their mind with words and ideas, not with guns and bombs. And so that's really where what the non-aggression principle says. It says that we are not going to start using force. We might use force in self-defense, but we're not going to initiate that force.
And that's actually part of the membership process, if you will, in the Libertarian Party. You know, we're completely unique in that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking people to, before they join the party, observe a level of fundamental respect for other people's beliefs, traditions, mores, practices, that really no organization, that's why we call ourselves the Party of Principle. You know, as the party chairman here in the state, I think my message this weekend and for the rest of the year is that the strength is our message, and the message is our strength. That we as libertarians went through a phase here in Rhode Island where we attempted, as some of us, I should say, not all of us, you know who I'm talking to, they know who I'm talking to, we're going to take a sort of a pragmatic approach. That, you know, that we had to somehow ease our way into this, that we didn't want to offend or shock or horrify people, as if somehow we could, with the notion that you're walking up to people and saying you're a free man and woman, you know, engage in your life in a manner in which you choose, which brings up the fundamental question, and this is sort of the big build-up here, if you will, and you know this is my obsession from the conversations we've had. We live in a state that transcends natty state. That's a tired cliche here, Rhode Island. We did natty state way before it was cool. We were a natty state in the 70s. All right, you know, New York's got nothing on us. Maryland, I know you guys like tax error there or something else like that. Sorry, we got you. All right, this is the natty state, and we ironically are at a level that I think places like Maryland are starting to approach. We are the failed natty state, where that social compact that I talk about, that romantic notion that government will introduce justice into every single equation in our life, has overtly failed. Everything in this state is at failure level. It's just a question of getting people to accept it. You've had some interesting conversations with folks, and we'll talk about the war on drugs and particularly legalization of cannabis. And in your address to the folks in Massachusetts, many of which, by the way, will be joining us tomorrow night, so a shout out to our friends in Massachusetts, at the Massachusetts Libertarian Party, who have been wonderful partners with us and helping us, get through our baby steps. But you talked about how important it was, right, to cut. I'll say my words, to cut to the chase.
Yeah.
That this sort of baby step process of liberty begets challenges all of its own.
Yep.
So how do we get there from here?
So let me talk about two parts of that. And the first part is people are often afraid that a hardline message is going to not resonate with some people. And that's true. That's true. A soft line message will also not resonate with some people. I mean, a medium line, I mean, any kind of message there's no message that I know of that has 100% resonation rate, if you will. But there are people who, in this state, would be very open to a very hardline libertarian message. Some of them might go to Brown. I was right over here. I didn't say anything, by the way. I didn't say anything while I was at Brown about how I opposed public education, how I thought we needed to just stop all these military behaviors. I didn't talk about ending the war on drugs at the time. Why? I was afraid to. I didn't want to be the only person there on that side of the fight. Now today, I'm much older. I don't care about that kind of stuff. But at the time, I was young. I was a college student. I was nervous, so I didn't say anything. I'll tell you this though: if somebody else had said something, I probably would have backed them up. And if there's probably somebody else out there who, if they saw two people saying we need to get the government completely out of education, he might have jumped in. And there's definitely people there's many more people that they say three people, they're definitely welcome to jump in. So on a pragmatic messaging level, a hardline message will resonate with the people right now who are silent, who are hiding, who don't think that their views are shared by anybody at all, and they want to be the only person on one side of the fight. So on a pragmatic level, just recognize that. But let's also talk about the pragmatism of the actual ideas. We look at education, we can say, couldn't we just go talk about vouchers?
If we talk about legalizing drugs, couldn't we say, well, only certain companies should be allowed to sell those drugs? What happens then? What happens if we go to charter schools? What happens if we go to vouchers? The result is that now those charter schools or those voucher schools are your new blockades. Those are the people who are now going to be trying to stop the ball from moving forward. Right now, you can talk to any of the many multi-million-dollar charter schools out there and ask, how do you feel about moving to a complete free market education? And then you can talk to a teachers union, the public school teachers unions, to ask how they feel about moving to a free market in education. You're going to get the same response. Once an organization becomes entrenched, either through pure socialism, like a government school, or through crony capitalism, like a charter school, they do not want to see the ball move forward, generally. There's some people who are just so motivated by ethics, they're going to want to see it no matter what. But in general, they're not going to want to see that ball move forward. So instead of trying to target these half measures, which introduce their own problems, which are suspiciously identical to the current problems, we need to introduce the full measure, recognizing we're not going to get 100% agreement. But we're going to get a lot of agreement from people that you might be surprised agree with you on this.
On a local level, we're facing the same issue with the legalization of cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
For the record, of course, the libertarian movement has become synonymous with that. That's something we just accept at this point, because it's really representative of our approach to life in general.
Mm-hmm.
So if the audience can get beyond, whether you're listening tonight live or whether you listen to this on the Go Local Providence and Coalition Radio Facebook page, let's move for a moment beyond how you feel about cannabis. And let's look at the history in the state. Now, a lot of very good people put together a medical cannabis program, and in doing so created tiers of activity, highly regulated, and now the discussion has come to the fore about legalizing it and making it a social product and delivered the same way that we deliver alcohol to people. To your point, and I testified, in fact, we played ad nauseum on a variety of Go Local and Libertarian Party websites my testimony that night. That night, I was approached by several lobbyists for these compassion centers, interestingly named, whom now are entrenched in the delivery after significant investment and hold, again, here we are in Rhode Island, we're the monopoly state. We create monopolies, and it appears that our debt is as valuable as monopoly money. The notion that these folks have a lock on the delivery system for cannabis, which obviously in its complete legality becomes worthless, it is right front and center.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that night, other bills that were being discussed included the creation of additional compassion centers, 2 to 3. Again, highly controlled. The existing compassion centers, as opposed to getting together with their brethren and saying, we're going to fight the good fight together, their first reaction, and it was instantly poo-pooed, was that the market isn't ready for more competition. What? What do you say to that, Arvin?
I mean, if look at it like this, right? We could safely assume that taxi cab companies believe that it is good to be able to drive people around for money. But who has opposed Uber the strongest? Taxi cab companies. Because they now have an entrenched, protected monopoly, and they don't want to see more competition. It's not that they disagree with the idea. It would be ridiculous for taxi cab companies to say that driving people around for profit is wrong. That's all they do. But again, they're going to want to restrict their competition. That's why my opinion is you should always do whatever you can to get to that free market, unrestricted competition as quickly as possible. Even if you're just talking about it, even if you're put that idea out from day one. Make sure everybody knows the goal is a completely unregulated free market. Anything else might be a step along the way or a compromise, and sometimes we are going to have to make compromises. But put that idea in everyone's head from the beginning. Let people know that our goal isn't just to legalize medical marijuana, but to end the drug war completely. And yes, that means that prison guards are going to often have to find other jobs. We're going to have fewer people in prison. It often means that alcohol companies are going to have more competition. Fine. It often means that organizations like the DEA, a lot of people working there are going to have to find other jobs. Good. But that idea needs to be there right from the beginning, because that's what we're fighting for. The idea that we need to fight for step 10 by pretending that there's only step 1, it's not a long-term winning proposition, because you're just creating blockades then at step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my message in this area is to do whatever you can to move directly to a completely free market in any given system, rather than to encourage baby steps as the final goal.
And that's a message that we've chosen as a party here in the state to embrace. And I believe that the presidential election at the Libertarian level had quite a bit to do with that locally. We supported a vice presidential candidate initially that was supposed to bring us riches, was supposed to bring us attention, was supposed to bring us, you ready for this? I'm using the coalition air quotes, credibility. Ultimately, and let's be blunt, that vice presidential candidate made us a laughingstock. It did not bring us credibility. It clouded our attempts to deliver a libertarian message, the true libertarian message that Arvin's been talking about tonight, and we became enmeshed in this sort of mess, as opposed to taking an incredible opportunity where you had a bully pulpit nationally to deliver a truly free market message of a group of individuals who have formed a political party and overtly campaigning for your own individual rights. We missed a lot of that opportunity because the conversation instead became the typical cliche handicapped election. Where do you stand relative to candidate A, candidate B, and who are you vouching for? Because you yourself as a candidate are playing into that failed lesser of two evils message. How ironic was that?
I mean, there were definitely areas where I thought the messaging could have been more helpful.
Right.
I also think that there's areas where the messaging was probably not that helpful, but was actually probably unhelpful. I would say counterproductive. And that happens when we try to play the, quote, strategy game, which means we're going to figure out what's the most strategic and pragmatic thing to do right now, and we're going to do that. And the problem with trying to play that strategy game is it is a game that is difficult, if not impossible. For example, if anyone, say 20 years ago, had used the techniques that Donald Trump successfully used to get elected, if he'd used those same exact techniques, if Trump had used those same exact techniques 20 years ago, would have been laughed out of the primary. But they work now. Why? Thousands of millions of unpredictable factors. See, we realize as libertarians that government is not smart enough to make all these economic decisions. And that's why we say, let's not have government involved, because government can't do that kind of prediction. No one can. But we forget that the same applies at the individual level. Strategically, the answer is generally unknowable. Strategically, the right answer changes so much from election to election, from day to day, year to year, that trying to guess the right strategy is a fool's errand. I've learned in politics that I can never figure out what the smartest thing ever to do is going to be. So I've realized that it's most effective to do the right thing. The right thing for libertarians is to put forth an uncompromised, direct, honest, unadulterated libertarian message. Is that going to be scary for some people? Probably. Is it going to work better or worse than a compromised message? I have absolutely no idea. Neither do you. No one does. Rather than trying to predict which various version of the thing that's kind of close to the libertarian message but isn't quite there is the best one, instead of doing that, put forth the libertarian message. It is a good message. It is a strong message. It is a well thought out message. It is a powerful message. People who reject that message initially often come around to it. Maybe it takes them a few weeks or a few months. But that is the most powerful thing we have. The powerful thing that we have is the actual libertarian message. The powerful thing we have is not that we have the fanciest campaign strategy. We don't. But our message is so much stronger than the message of the two ruling parties right now, that it is our competitive advantage, and that's what we should be using.
Powerful words in difficult times.
Mm-hmm.
We have the opportunity, still post-election, to continue that message, particularly at the hyper level in a city like Providence, which is failing, where people are looking for answers, in a state like Rhode Island, which has failed to deliver on any of the promises made in that romantic notion that I call that government compact, which routinely expected citizens to pay taxes, and at the same time fails to deliver at even a most fundamental level on any of the implicit promises that are a result of those taxes. Interestingly enough, despite all the challenges we face on an international level, despite all the challenges we face in the White House right now, and with our failed Congress and the failures that are occurring on a routine level at the state and local level, this is, despite all of that, the very best time to deliver that message, because this is when people need to hear it. This is when people are opening to listening. It's not during these artificial moments of silence where everything seems to be okay, where that myth that government creates, that we're taking care of you, seems to be almost working. It's at moments like this when our failed foreign policies wreak havoc on our cities and our security, where we as a nation yesterday responded to, years ago, what would have been just a routine lunatic in Times Square. The entire nation took a deep breath and wondered whether or not there had been a terrorist attack as a direct result of our failed foreign policy. Where we as a nation literally lurched from financial crisis to financial crisis because we simply are incapable of balancing the books at our government. Where we as a nation spend more money than ever and get less quality for our education. And hell, we could spend another 2 hours talking about healthcare delivery. Where we as a nation, despite spending more money ever in its history, arguably get less quality healthcare for its citizenry for the first time in our nation's history. We're actually on the downward side of the curve. It's really, our time has come.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make in outreach is they only try to do outreach to the people who are seeming to benefit the most. And there are pragmatic reasons for that. I mean, if you want to, reach out to people that can donate a lot of money, realistically, there are people who are going to, where in whatever way the current system hasn't totally crippled them, in whatever way they've been able to make it through or somehow even found a way to benefit from it. But you need to remember that the people who are most willing to hear, most likely to hear a different message are the one for whom what we have right now isn't exactly working perfectly. These are the people who are wondering why they and their spouse need to work 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week each to provide less than a single person, a one earner, could provide 50 or 60 years ago. They're the people who are wondering why, despite their hard work, they can't start a business without going through all this bizarre regulation. These are the people that we need to talk to. And the way to talk to somebody is to talk to them by giving them the respect of telling them the truth. And the power of that truth isn't something that happens right away. It doesn't change that first conversation. The first conversation is the beginning. The first time people hear about the libertarians at the beginning, maybe they're going to be turned off even by it. That's okay. Because over time, the truth of the message, once it's something that people can actually consider, is going to be the thing that's going to bring people over. It's the thing that's brought me over, it's the thing that brought so many of you already over. It's the actual real libertarianism that works. And so this is the time when people are feeling like they're missing something, when they're not getting what they should be getting. This is the time to talk to them.
We've only got a couple minutes left, and folks, joining me in studio, Arvin Vohra. Arvin is the Vice Chairman of the Libertarian Party of America. He's in town to address the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island's annual convention, which is being held in Bristol. I think we've still got literally 2 or 3 tickets left at lpri.us. He'll be joining Larry Sharp, one of our vice presidential nominees, as well as Matt Welch, who you see at Reason.com and just about every talking head show in America, to discuss real libertarian principles. I think tomorrow is going to be, as they would have said in high school English, a cathartic experience. But in a couple minutes left, tell us a little bit about your efforts and the Arvin Vohra method and what you're doing and what your immediate future is in politics, some of the things that you're involved in on a personal level.
So at a personal level, I work in education. I work in free market education. So most of my job is repairing damages done by public schools. That's what I do all day long. Sometimes you have kids that themselves, maybe they're a little lazy or whatever, but most of what we see is damage done by faulty curricula. So we work through my program, it's called the Vohra method, to correct a lot of that. And that's not to say that all of our students are coming in failing. A lot of them are getting straight A's. We work with them on standardized tests. We work with them on independent education, rebuilding their initiative, rebuilding their confidence. And we bring in such a high level of constant and continual innovation that our thing never looks the same way from month to month. And that's what education should look like. It should be education, in my view, should change as fast as culture does. And that's what we try to do over there. Politically, right now I'm serving as the Vice Chair of the Libertarian National Committee. In 2018, I plan to be running for U.S. Senate in Maryland, and you'll be hearing more about that in the coming months and weeks.
Excellent. Arvin, thank you.